Good morning. Thank you for being here. And thank you for the organizers for inviting us to this panel discussion, which I believe it's quite important in the state of construction these days. And the topic is, what is the impact of sustainability on fire safety? Because what happens is sustainability is at the forefront. It's very proactive. It's moving along with technology at a very fast pace. And I believe that the fire industry sometimes, it's reactive. Mm-hmm. Something happens and then we act upon it. So the discussion is there an impact on sustainability? What can we do about it? I know there's a conversation about lithium-ion batteries, but if we look at that, for example, that technology is moving and fire is catching up, and there's many others. So I would ask what the panel's thoughts are on this.
Hi, Alex. Am I working now? Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm. Try.
Yeah.
Closer.
Yeah, I think we need to look at how the buildings we live in today and the buildings we live in 2050, when most countries now have committed to being zero carbon neutral by 2050. So we had a fact presented to us recently that 80% of the buildings we live in 2050 are built already. So that means 80% of the buildings we have today, we need to retrofit these to be carbon neutral. And one of the ways of doing that is by introducing new technologies such as lithium-ion batteries, more insulation into buildings, new materials, air tightness, for example. All of these have an impact on fire safety, how a fire behaves, how these materials react in fire, the products of combustion that comes from these fires. So there's a massive impact, and there's a lot more research needs to be done on these materials and the impact on life safety.
Perfect, thank you. So the message here, Stephen, it's that as we grow and look into the future, one key element of sustainability is not only new buildings, but in fact, there's something we need to focus on, which are existing building stocks or future existing building stocks, and the sustainability behind how we get there. Susan, any comments on that?
Yeah, I think I'd agree. A big part of sustainability is repurposing, reusing our existing building stock, and that in its own right is going to have challenges for fire safety because those existing buildings probably don't comply with the current codes to start with. And then we want to introduce new materials of construction that we might not even know the fire performance of yet. They're some sort of new sustainable material. And as we talked about before, the new energy sources, whether they're lithium-ion batteries providing energy to the building itself, or in electric vehicle cars and scooters. I know one of the big challenges I have right now is how I'm going to design basement car parks for electric vehicles. Is it more water? Is it more smoke control? Is it separation of the EV areas from the others? There's day-to-day challenges with this stuff already.
Perfect. And Engineer Salma, difficult question for you. How is the governance or codes or even from an authority standpoint, how do you foresee tackling this major concern at this point?
Yeah, I think we are in very good shape, and it is a very harsh argument actually, but once you are going to control or reduce the severe accidents and severe fires, then you are going to manage it environmentally. There will be no wastage of materials, no pollution, and such. I think we are in a good shape from the standards guys. Even when we are going to reduce the pump capacities, for example, I think that we are reducing the consumption. We are reducing the water consumption as well. I feel we are going on the right way, but maybe it has to be argued as an theory.
Of course.
Yeah.
So there certainly is preparation from the codes right now, moving into the challenges of sustainability. Peter, from your experience, what else from a code perspective or regulatory perspective that engineer Salma mentioned, what would you say what can we do to enhance the current preparations? So we have a framework. How can we advance that?
It's a very, very sort of interesting conversation. I think sometimes we need to go back to basics, look at risk, and what are we trying to achieve. Within the GCC, there's a lot of visions, 2030, 2045. Innovation is happening very, very quickly, and sometimes codes, standards, testing can't keep up with the innovation. So if we go back to basics, look at the risk, what are we trying to achieve, and as engineers, how do we make things move forward, embracing sustainability and looking after the environment?
Question to the panel, because you mentioned something quite interesting there about risks, right? But sustainability, materials, they're moving so fast. Do we know the risks? A question to the panel. How do we go back to that basic if potentially those risks are not really known? Maybe understood, but not known. Anyone?
I can maybe talk to that a little bit. We have some projects just now where clients are wanting to put materials on facade systems or use much more timber in new buildings. And they're not necessarily projects here, but we're asking those clients to invest in fire tests because we don't have the data and the evidence to prove what we need. And it's not always, I think the standard fire tests that are regulated get us some way, but at a certain point in time, you need to do larger scale tests to really understand what's happening. And sometimes that's funded by research, and sometimes it's funded by a project if they want to do something that's, not understood well enough.
I think as well the existence of ESL now is a great move towards the testing of the materials, the new materials itself. And the solar panel themselves, BIPV, is very, very important as well.
That's another great example, exactly, yeah. Yep.
So this is a safety testing lab within Civil Defense right now that's doing testing for materials. The question is, so do we have all the tests? Do we need new tests? Do we need new standards? And who pays for that? Who pays for that research and development?
Yeah. With regard to who pays, I think that there has to be a very fine line of competency, really. If you've got a vested interest in a particular product, you've got to be very honest. You've got to talk with the relevant stakeholders, and collectively. Just in my own professional career, I think sometimes if you're honest with yourself and you actually don't know the answer, you then go to colleagues that maybe can put the jigsaw puzzle together, and collectively you come up with a solution. And I think with innovation, that is one of the things that you might not know the answer, but go and speak to people.
Yeah. I think the key to this is having the fire safety conversation at the very beginning of a project in collaboration with the sustainability objectives, the aesthetics, the costs, the other constraints. And if we're all there at the table, then usually you get there and you find a sensible solution. But if you're brought in too late and the sustainability agenda is already in place and the building is covered in, a green wall or PV installations or is also timber, you need some constraints and consideration of all these variables at the beginning. So you have a holistic approach to all of this.
I think too we need to recognise that all these new materials we're bringing into buildings for a sustainable point of view, they're not normally or haven't traditionally been within buildings. So the traditional tests we were using are not considering these elements. So I think too that the testing methods need to evolve along with the new technologies.
Engineer Salma?
Of course, there has to be new materials, new standards, and new testing. And the generation of that kind of testing, I think it is maybe a cooperation between the research centers, the universities, maybe even the labs themselves. But we have to keep moving.
And that's an interesting conversation because there's a lot of research involved in this. There's a lot of research for sustainability at that university level, at that project level. But maybe there isn't enough for fire, it's limited. Would you think that we as an industry need to, when you say, Peter, go back to basics, we go back to basics as an industry, but should we start doing more and push that back to basics to the educational, to the university level? And how can we do that?
Back to basics, yeah. I'm just pondering on that actually, because going back to the lithium batteries, it's a big problem within the built environment, and we'll probably come up with a solution, operationally, design, as we then move on to the next step. So we're always doing catch up. So collectively, with the universities, the engagement as young engineers come into the industry, who are fresh, looking to learn, if we can give them the right knowledge, skills, and sometimes don't be frightened to have a blank piece of paper. Don't hide behind the code, and go back to the basics and build up a solution.
Yeah, I think it's much more, as I've found over the last 20 years, is research is more valuable if it's informed by industry. And I think there's a huge need for much more collaboration between schools, universities and industry to make sure that what we're doing is heading in the right direction.
As Peter was saying that we need to go back to basics, which is true. We need to understand what is sustainability. It is we need those resources in this generation, but we need to keep sure that it is available for the next generations as well. So if we need to connect between the fire safety and the sustainability, it is very hard, but you need to state the theory itself and then to start to analyze it. Is it safe? But anyways, you don't have to compromise the fire safety as well.
No, and what is sustainability? And we're not going to answer that today, but but sustainability is governed by one entity, and just as an example, because of where we are, we're in Dubai. Sustainability is governed by the municipality, and they have their own processes on how sustainability is implemented. And I've been involved in sustainability conversations in projects of the fire element. I think it's one line or two lines of very archaic things. And then the fire element is governed by civil defense codes and standards. Are we missing a link here that when there's and there's committees for both? Are we missing a link where when we're developing a sustainability aspect or codes or standards, there should be a lot more involvement from the fire industry, and vice versa? When we have a fire update, I think there's an update to the code coming up, should there be a committee of sustainability experts that input into that?
Yeah, I think there should be more integration between sustainable engineers and fire engineers. As Peter said, you go back to basics. If you have a sprinkler building, you're going to have a smaller fire, but you don't have flashover, which is less emissions produced from a fire. So by implementing the fire safety strategy and all the passive and active fire safety systems, you actually improve the sustainability of the building. So we don't have a points-based system like you do in sustainability, but we can add to the points-based system of a sustainable strategy of a building by implementing additional fire protection systems, or in some case, we can make the case for reducing the embedded carbon from passive fire protection. You can make the justification for a 2-hour wall to be reduced to 1 hour with the addition of other measures. So there is ways we can reduce the emissions and the sustainable impact of a building through fire safety.
If I may also add that this year, 2023, has been identified in the UAE as the year of sustainability. So there is, for sure, some very strong intergovernment mandates for each agency to work on sustainability internally. And there's a very important event in November that there's going to be some very stark announcements, I'm sure. But I just go back to Susan's point about, we have a duty to really investigate solutions. And when we first talked about sustainability, and I don't want to steal the thunder of EV panel, but we suitably parked all the EV vehicles at the entrance of the shopping malls, right by the entrance doors. And now we're all kind of questioning ourselves, oops, that's a bit of a problem, because obviously what's going on with certain vehicles and the smoke emission with the thermal runaway, it's quite a hazardous place to put them. So yeah, a lot of work to be going on with, and I'm sure all the engineers in this room will be scratching their heads and looking at different solutions, and that's good news. We welcome that, and thank you very much, panelists, and yourself for making a topic. But I don't know whether there's any questions from the floor on this particular subject. Just if there's any burning question, we can. Yes, someone. Okay.
There's one over there.
Do we have a mic, a roaming mic, or maybe you could shout? Okay, just yep.
That will be contributing more towards the sustainability.
Okay, I think I've got your point. I'll just have an attempt at answering this. I think there's, you're quite right, and we all know very well the ESL lab working very hard at the moment and developing new research and testing of materials. And I think there's a lot of research going on through the lab about materials and the suitability of those materials. And of course, once we get all that wonderful information, it will then feature through and channel through the new edition of the fire codes. But maybe you'd like to expertly answer the question.
I think Vinay was talking about potentially maybe the issue with cladding and the very large fires that we're experiencing, which are not sustainable. So maybe, I think there is moves afoot with some developers to replace some of that, to manage that risk. But I think, the whole world has learned a lesson about combustible materials and being very, very careful with them to not have these large fires. But coming back to the scoring system for sustainability, I think possibly there should be something around sustainability points for really minimizing your fire hazard by using certain materials, having sprinkler systems, etc. So, I think there's a link there as well.
And I think the approach has to be not about the fire itself, because the fire is unpredicted. And the material, it can be installed any kind of material in the building, and we can test it and make sure that it is combustible or non-combustible material, depends on the use of the building, the height, whatever. But we need to focus on the building resilience itself, because this is really very important. If the building is resilient, then it can fight up, or maybe we will reduce the chances of the fire itself.
Yeah.
So there's sustainability education to recycle. There should be fire education to prevent fires.
Yeah.
Very good.
Okay, well, yeah, okay, yes, please. I know you don't need a mic.
This is picking up from this good point that testing of the materials. First of all, my name is Sajid Raza. I'm picking up this question. 9 years back, there was a conference and it was about fire safety versus sustainable materials. Spot on, sustainability needs relatively lighter materials, newer materials. And newer and lighter materials probably may have fire safety problems. Simple question, how do we handle having lighter materials on the buildings and related fire hazards? For example, EPS is quite sustainable, light, thermal conductivity point of view is very good, but from fire safety point of view, it is challenging. What provisions can we bring in the new code that when you bring a new material, a lighter material, how are we going to handle that? That's the question.
Okay, I'll attack you immediately on that one. So basically what I said earlier on about the ESL laboratory, working very hard at looking at new materials and designing tests to suit that particular material, because don't forget, with a lot of this equipment and materials, there are no standards. So, they are seeking different international bodies to get to work together to come up with some standards. So a lot of research going on. And just quickly, I divert slightly, but they're also encouraging integration and involvement with the universities around Dubai. I think it's a wonderful thing that the universities have actually got grants and they can put budgets towards introducing students on these research programs. So it's basically watch this space. There's a lot going on, and I'm not trying to sell ESL, but I just know what goes on inside. So please, anybody want to answer?
I think too, the development of codes and standards and even authority approvals need to take into account that these materials, they won't have the inherent fire resistance that you normally would. So we need to look at alternative performance-based designs and how we can fight a fire or prevent a fire, not depending on these materials with the same inherent fire resistance.
Yeah, I also think though we shouldn't be afraid to say no sometimes, because sometimes it's just not appropriate, especially with materials that perform as badly as say EPS. So in a small building that we're maybe as a project team willing to lose in a fire, maybe that's okay. But for anything of significant size, you need to just be careful. And I think fire safety engineers need to be willing to say no occasionally, but then offer alternative solutions and ways of achieving the same objectives, because it's possible.
Yeah, and going back to Captain Issa's presentation, I think artificial intelligence will play a bigger role as we start to move and interact with it. And I love the fact that in his presentation he said that predictability is one of the things that they're looking at. And I also believe in analytics, getting the data in and analyzing that data to get some predictive information as to what causes the fires and the seriousness of the fires. So I think sustainability, of course, will be linked with artificial intelligence, and I think we've got a lot of exciting times ahead. Perhaps not for me, I've got my fishing rod all shined up, but certainly a lot of you guys. I think that's about it. Thank you very much, panelists. A really engaging topic. Alexander, thanks so much for chairing it so
Perfect.
perfectly.
Thank you.